I was challenged by someone who I took off his ability to comment on the videos because he refused to respond to my responses. He threw things at me. He threw dirt at my movement, at my Rebbe, at Hasidim. And when I responded to him, he just changed the subject. You can't do that and be an honest person. The person was dishonest. I don't care, and I can tell you that the person was probably ignorant and just liked to talk about controversies. And there's a couple of people out there that still do the same. But let me address one point that requires addressing. And this is the challenge as to why Hasidim say they are the Shluchim of the Rebbe's Shluchim, to do the commandments. Are they not God's emissaries? And of course the answer is that Moses was God's emissary. And those who followed Moses were Moses' emissaries doing what God wanted. Why was it necessary to be Moses' emissary? And the answer may surprise you, may not. You and I have limited abilities. Things that are inconvenient bother us. The ability to accept responsibility, even when the confrontation seems to be far greater, that we don't think it's worth it, or we don't think we can survive it. The ability to overcome circumstances that appear to be stronger than us, that appear to be better prepared than us, the ability to see things through despite all odds, don't come from our own personal abilities. They come from the fact that we are connected to Moses. And I'll give you, for instance, and you may start cursing at me because I said the following, but I'm not trying to demean anyone. I'm explaining to you why we say we are Shluchim of the Rebbe. There was a great tzaddik 2 generations ago, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, also known as the Chaim. At one point he was ready to fight the communists physically in order to save Russian Jewry. He felt that strongly about it. However, when it came down to it, he was offered to be allowed to go back to Poland, to Lithuania, where he came from, and open up his yeshiva there. He took that route and left. What about fighting the communists? He didn't have to. He could bring his yeshiva elsewhere. He didn't have to have a fight. It wasn't an obligation upon him. And so he chose not to fight. And he chose to leave. And those who know the holy Chaim's life know that this bothered him for the last 10, 12 years of his life. In 1927, the previous LUBAVITCHER Rebbe was arrested for fighting against the communists. He stayed. The Chaim left. Chaim looked into the halacha and saw that he was not obligated to fight with self-sacrifice. And so he left. The previous LUBAVITCHER Rebbe knew intrinsically that if he would leave, if he left just as he was at that moment,
Russian Jewry had no chance to survive against the communists. So he continued the struggle alone as the only great leader who stood up to them. When he was arrested, the Chafetz Chaim cried. How do I know that he cried? I heard this from Rabbi Mordechai Savitsky, who was one of the greatest students of the Chafetz Chaim, might have been the greatest genius coming out of Rotten, who happens to be the father-in-law of Detroit's Reb Shmuel Irons. And I heard this from Reb Mordechai himself. The Chafetz Chaim began to cry and said, why did I leave him? I should be sitting there in the jail with him. Why did I leave him? This was the reaction of a true Gadol b'Yisrael, a true great man, sensing that one does not leave the field of battle. But he was free, according to the law. Yet the previous LUBAVITCHER Rebbe didn't look just at the letter of the law, he looked at the spirit of the law. What would happen if he left at that moment? Whoever was religious stood no chance. It was only the self-sacrifice of the previous Rebbe that showed the way for thousands of people to follow. Now this might have been a small percentage of the Jews of Russia, but those thousands affected many others. And they survived. They survived, few in numbers, but all over Russia. And when Russia's communist empire collapsed, they were able to pick up the pieces and create a renaissance among the Jews in Russia. That renaissance started with the determined self-sacrifice of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and continued on to this day. It was his example, and not just his example, his energy transferred onto his students that allowed this self-sacrifice to continue until it won out in the end. We are the Rebbe's Shluchim because we are inspired and connected with the power of the Rebbe. And that's what gives us the ability to go to places that don't want us, to try to raise money in a place that looks at us funny, to raise our children as Jews, as Orthodox Jews, as Hasidic Jews, despite the environment, to be able to transform our community from selfishness and self-indulgence to Torah mitzvahs. For better, for worse, whatever success we have is not from our own powers. They come from a higher power that came through the Lubavitcher Rebbe. We are Shluchim of the Rebbe because we are inspired by him. We go by his directives, and we know that the determination that we have in order to be successful comes through that channel as well. And it's the same as the Anshe Moshe, the men of Moses. It is not idolatry. Idolatry is when we worship something other than God. We worship only God. But the power to worship that God comes from the soul that is the central soul of Israel. And that's the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And that is why we are the Shluchim of the Rebbe.